Hey guys, what's going on? Tim back in the Revolved Realty studio doing a little small business update today with my friend Tom Rigsby, our local business coach, entrepreneur extraordinaire, and the guy who's been monitoring the whole COVID thing for small business here locally. How are you, buddy?
Doing well, man. How are you?
I'm doing good. I got to say, you've been indoors too long. You look a little white.
I know. I'm my wife calls me pasty white. I prefer Casper the Friendly Ghost, but it's new lights that are not tuned well in the studio, so we're still working on those.
Let's talk about that because you've had to change the way that you do things because of this virus. You normally just broadcast out of your house, but you also do a radio show at WTKI and you're working on building out the studio there.
Yeah, so I almost always come down to the radio station to do the show every week, but this in an attempt to maintain some social distancing, we're building out a second studio so that we're not right on top of each other, and that's been a lot of work, but I mean, it's nice. I think it's going to turn into a nice place to use for this and for our daily podcast and some other things. So cool. I'm happy with that.
The Tom Rigsby Studio.
Cool. Well, I think we're going to call it Studio B. So it'll be Studio B with Tom Rigsby.
There you go. I like that too. So, all right. Well, let's just talk a little bit about what is going on in the small business community. You know, my forte is real estate. So I've been focusing a lot on keeping folks abreast on what's going on in the market and how things are progressing. But let's talk about it from a small business standpoint. Over the last month or so, your observations on what's happened, how things have gone, just small business in general. What are you seeing out there?
Stress and anxiety.
The two big ones.
Well, there's a couple of different classes. I kind of put businesses into three different buckets. There are businesses like yours. We were chatting a little bit before we got started. This is kind of the way that you've been doing business all along. So this really hasn't had that big of an impact. Mm-hmm. So that's one class. We've got another class. It hasn't
had an impact on me because I have always done things virtually, a lot of technology, a lot of internet. Who it really has impacted are those realtors who were not using those tools.
Yes.
You know what I mean? The ones that never, I've been using Zoom for years. I've been doing video walkthroughs for years. So my model didn't change, but it did change a lot for other realtors who were not using that technology in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And these classes are not industry exclusive. So you can have a restaurant that's it really didn't impact us. And you can have a restaurant they're closed down.
It didn't impact Domino's.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's a great example.
Didn't impact Stakeout, but that was their model pre-COVID.
All along, right? They had no dining rooms. It wasn't, it was just more of the same. Mm-hmm. So we've got these businesses that I don't want to say are not impacted, but it didn't have a direct impact on them.
Or it actually increased their business.
It could in a lot of cases. Mm-hmm. Then you have those who it's been a significant impact, but they're still able to operate. So most restaurants with a dining room that are doing carry out or curbside, that would be an example of those. And then you have businesses that are just closed down.
Right.
The nail salons, hair salons are great examples. They're just, dentists actually are a great example. Unless it's an emergency, dentists are not supposed to be taking patients. Yeah. So now out of those three categories, there's further subdivisions, right? You've got business owners who had planned for an emergency, a contingency like this, and then you got others that are already out of cash and they're done. Mm-hmm. And those can exist in all three of those categories. So one of the things that we've been working very diligently with our clients on is to, number one, make sure they can survive until we get to the midway point. Mm-hmm. And then once we're past the midway point, once we got survival nailed down, let's make a plan for after the midway point so that we can come out of this with our foot on the gas, not this, kind of tentative, jerky, like me trying to drive a manual transmission.
What is the midway point?
Well, I think we're at the midway point.
Is that when things level out?
Yeah. So if we continue to use the metaphor we hear on TV a lot about flattening the curve,
Mhm.
they're talking about a bell curve, right? Where the number of cases goes way up and then it comes way down. Well, there's a midway point on that curve. And there's some calculus and statistical ways that we can look at this to try and determine whether we've hit that midway point or not. And we are counseling our clients and telling them we're past the midway point. I believe my advice is that it happened on Saturday. So we're at a point now where, okay, we've for the last week or two, we've been working on these 90-day plans. Let's pull them out and put them to work.
Right. It's time to start planning for afterward.
For rebooting, right? We're calling it rebooting the business, rebooting the economy. At some point, the tap's going to be opened up and we can go back to less restrictive business. I don't want to call it normal, but less restrictive. There's a lot of I'm calling it back pressure in the pipes from our customers. People want to get out and shop and do things and go to restaurants and go back to the movies. And as soon as there's the slightest crack that lets people do that, it's going to be a flood. So we work very closely with our clients to make sure that they have a plan, systems, and processes in place. I mean, simple things like if you're a restaurant and you've been working at 50% capacity, and all of a sudden on the briefing today, they say, okay, you can open up, full bore tomorrow. Can I even order enough food and get enough wait staff in to be able to open tomorrow?
Yeah. Are you concerned at all that people are going to want to open too soon?
Well, that's a legitimate question, and it's one that we really don't have a basis to understand. I think what we will see as these restrictions begin to be loosened is that they are loosened gradually. So, okay, you can open the dining room again, but at 25% capacity or 50% capacity, which makes a lot of sense. We can maintain in most restaurant dining rooms, we can maintain, more than 6 feet between tables if it's at half capacity. Right? And I think we will see those restrictions lifted gradually. There'll be a lot of scrutiny of the numbers to see even if there's the slightest hint that this thing is going back up. Right. And then we just kind of react from there.
I think that's one of the key factors here is, okay, people want to get back to normal. Yeah. We are all yearning for normalcy. And if we try to go back to normal too quickly, we could revert back and start all over again. However, if we ramp up normalcy, rather than having all these big crowds come together now, if we start with and I think, and you hit on this, you have to monitor that.
Right.
So there has to be a period of, okay, here we are now, we're going to ramp back up. We're going to do this for a little bit. We're going to monitor. We're going to do this for a little bit. We're going to monitor. And because honestly, Tom, nobody knows what the hell's going to happen.
No.
I mean, the politicians,
we really
you and I, we can talk about this all day long. We don't know.
Well, we don't know. We don't even know for sure how many people have been infected. We don't even know for sure how many people have died, which is unfortunately, the most reliable number that we have to go with. But what we do know, I mean, you and I have been around business for a long time. One of the constants that we do know very well is human behavior. And
how difficult it is to predict and control.
Well, true. So I think that as we begin to open this up, as things begin to, as people are able to get out and do things, that this back pressure is going to, move to the forefront, and it's going to be super hard to stop. Yeah.
Well, I'm very positive. I think that once we do get over this hump and we start going back to normalcy, I think the result of that is going to be a boom. I think real estate's going to boom. I think retail is going to boom. The question is how, and you hit on this, is how prepared are these businesses going to be to manage this boom when it comes? The downside of this all is everything revolves around money.
Right.
Okay, when you're a small business, you've got to have money to operate, money to buy inventory, money to pay folks. Are you unimpressed with how with the speed of the government's response to this? Do you know anyone who has got a penny from the government? Because I don't.
I do actually. I would put it in the dozens category of contacts and clients that I know firsthand they've received their EIDL loans, the emergency impact disaster loans. I know more people who have gotten their P3 loans than their EIDL loans. Mm-hmm. And I've heard of a number of people, although not as many, that are getting their $1,200 stimulus money. So you got to look at it from this perspective. The numbers that the Treasury and the IRS are dealing, and the Small Business Administration are dealing with, are huge numbers. Yep. 60 million small businesses in the United States, 326 million residents, right? That's a lot of checks.
Yeah.
And if we think about the speed with which we've gotten to where we are, that's moving at light speed for the government, right? They don't do anything fast. Mm-hmm. And to think that yesterday was 2 weeks since the EIDL loan applications opened, and this past Friday was a week since the P3 loans opened up, and we see businesses that are funded already. To me, that's pretty remarkable that they're able to move that fast.
The thing that I keep seeing is a lot of pundits believe that by the time that money does start to flow, those businesses are going to be gone. You know what I mean? And I understand that nothing happens quickly with the government. That's a gimme. And this is an enormous amount of money. But
it is.
Yeah, the thing that I'm seeing is I think the vast majority of small businesses, they're not going to be able to hold on until this money is released.
Well,
and that's just the process.
Yeah, it is the process, and to some extent, that's just survival of the fittest. Mm-hmm. Restaurants. One of the reasons that we have pushed supporting local restaurants so much is because food service operates on razor-thin margins anyway. They don't have enough cash flow to survive something like this on their own. Mm-hmm. We have to do something to help them. And out of that 60 million small businesses, over half of them are restaurants. Mm-hmm. So, we have to do something. Now, the fact that the other thing that comes into play, though, here, Tim, is that business owners and entrepreneurs, we're problem solvers. Mm-hmm. There's a huge portion, we talked about the 3 buckets that they exist in. There's a huge portion of these folks that are like, okay, well, the field has changed. I have to do something different. Let's get in here and figure it out. Right. And they're figuring it out. And the ones that are sitting back and like, well, I haven't got my check yet, so I guess I'm just going to stay closed. We can plan on buying out their surplus inventory in a couple of weeks because they're not going to make it anyway.
Right. I think a lot of it comes down to not reopening what you had, but having the money and the support to do something different.
Yeah, and
if my restaurant is out of business by the time I get my check, I'm going to use that money to get back on my feet because, and I think that's the point of it. I don't think it's so much to sustain; it's to recover. Does it make sense?
Well, yeah, I do, and it does. And I think the other thing that's important here is you've used the word normalcy a lot. I got a lot of questions over the weekend, just in conversations about when are things going to be back to normal. And I think what we have to really get our head wrapped around is we're not going back to the way it was 6 months ago.
It's going to be a new normal.
It's going to be a new normal.
Good point.
And so it's that sense of normalcy, right? We've been doing video calls now instead of meetings for 4 or 5 weeks now. Well, now they feel normal. Mm-hmm. It's normal to hear the dog bark. It's normal, for his screen to go black for a minute. We've accepted that, right? So what we have to do is recognize the things that have become normal that are bad habits and be able to break out of those, but keep the ones that actually improve the performance of the business.
And that's one of the things I wanted to ask you is what changes will businesses make now based on what we've experienced here? For example, my industry, everyone is preaching virtual.
Right.
Okay. So I think out of every great crisis, there stems innovation. So
Yeah.
what are businesses going to do differently, going forward, or what did they learn from this crisis that they could go, hey, you know what, I can do it this way and maybe increase my profits or increase my share. I think
Yeah.
there's going to be a lot of changes coming out of this.
I think there are two things really. One is, and I've said for a long time, the technology has existed to support remote work for a long time,
I've been doing it for
right?
years. Yeah.
And if anybody that within earshot of this that's worked in software knows exactly what I'm talking about. You can have a virtual team spread all over the world and still work like you're sitting right next to each other. You can even do paired programming that way.
Yep.
Right. So the technology is not lacking. What's been lacking is the management acceptance of that as an okay way to do work. And I've said for a long time that it would require generational change in executive leadership to migrate to that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think this is like ripping the Band-Aid off, and they've been forced into this. Now, the astute leaders are going to recognize, hey, we can still be productive and be remote.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives them two advantages. Number one, think about it from this perspective. If I'm renting out or leasing a whole office building to house my employees, and now half of them are willing to work from home, I don't have to pay as much in rent anymore.
Right. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
That's number one. Number two, I mean, the travel costs are crazy, the savings that we could recognize from that. But if you just look at it from a results oriented perspective, right? If I can say to this team, this is the result I need by the end of the week, you guys go figure it out. Let me know if you need help. And I'm not there to check that your butt's in that seat. I just have to trust that you're working on it. That's going to enable it. First, it gives ownership to the team, but secondly, it frees me up from the management that I had to do before to actually do work and think about growing the business. So I think those are some of the things that we see implemented that might have taken millennials getting into that executive level before, but now we've kind of been forced into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we'll see a lot of those things stick around. The other thing that does, by the way, if you remember before all this started, we were right at 2 to 3% unemployment, so virtual full employment. Companies were having to do extraordinary things to entice people to come to work for them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now that it's kind of like that, how are you going to keep them, how are you going to get them back on the farm? Now that I've experienced being able to work remotely, oh, wait, you want me to get up every morning, put clothes on, drive to your place, sit there so you can lord over me for 8 or 9 hours a day. And then, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So the astute leaders will recognize this as a potential advantage that they can use to sell to prospective employees.
Right. What about those businesses that do require human contact? The nail salons, the hair salons,
Sure.
the businesses that require humans to come into contact to conduct business. I don't know if their model can change, because I think that if you're going to have your nails done, you're not going to, until we come up with a virtual way to do it, or your haircut.
Right.
You know what I mean? I think there's always going to be those businesses, and there may not be change. They may be locked into doing what they've always done.
Well, but we've already seen barbers and hairstylists doing this, where their salons, they can't have their salon open right now. But if the customer is open to it and the stylist or the barber's open to it, I can come do a house call.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, there are ways. We are problem solvers. There are ways to deliver these services. And you're right. There are some things that we just cannot. I mean, they require face-to-face contact in order to deliver.
Mm-hmm.
And those are always going to present this kind of challenge. And we just have to find ways to do that in the context that is, say, I mean, you think about, you go into a restaurant now, it's not unusual to see the staff wearing gloves, even before this COVID thing broke out,
Mm-hmm.
wearing rubber gloves, serving gloves, whatever. 20 years ago, who did that?
Right.
Right. I mean,
Nobody.
I mean, there's constantly somebody going around wiping and cleaning up now. 20 years ago, you
Mhm.
did that before you closed up.
Yeah. I just wonder,
So,
once we do get back to the new normal, how lax will things get? You know, it's like
well,
after 9/11, we were on heightened security for a long time. Now, not so much. You know,
yeah,
so
but it's taken how long for us to be able to keep our belt on through the security, you know? I mean, I think we gradually go back into this and we
Mhm.
will find that spot where we are comfortable.
Yeah.
And some people, you know, we've kind of pointed and snickered at the germaphobes for a long time, right? And there are people who will continue to be hypersensitive to that
Mhm.
um, for longer than the rest of the population.
Yeah.
But you know, at some point, I mean, I heard Dr. Fauci suggested the other day that we just eliminate the practice of shaking hands.
Right.
Oh, well, good luck with that,
Yeah.
because I literally have to put my hands in my pocket right now to keep from shaking
It's
somebody's
just a
hand.
reaction,
It's just what you
you know?
do,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So yeah, there's a lot of personal choice associated with that and how much risk you're comfortable with. Some people bungee jump and other people don't. It doesn't change the risk. It just
True that.
changes what you're comfortable with.
Do you think this is going to change the way that we as a country rely on other countries for goods and services? For example, I think you and I have talked about this before. Most of the life-saving drugs in
Yeah.
our ER and our surgery centers come from China.
Yeah.
Do you think this is
147 pharmaceuticals that are considered life critical. They're all generics and they all come from China.
and
That's
they're
where
done so for economic reasons because it's really
yep.
cheaper to produce over there. Do you think this is going to change that? Are
Well,
we going to start leaning more toward made in America? Because I mean, let's be honest with it. China could just cut things off, and we would be crippled. And I
yeah.
mean that from an economic standpoint.
Yeah. I think every astute business owner needs to evaluate their supply chain.
Hmm.
And whether it is relying on one supplier for critical parts, which I have clients and they were in that position,
Hmm.
and that supplier, you know, caught the flu, caught COVID, and stopped shipping product. And they're like,
Right.
well, we otherwise would be open, but we can't get any materials,
Hmm.
right? So whether it's just adding some diversity into your supply chain, adding those backup sources, or really evaluating from a you know, political and economic perspective, do I want to rely on a source that's that far away
Hmm.
that you know, may or may not be as easy to access? I mean, again, we're problem solvers, right? So we have to look at this from the problem perspective. And one of the things what we're beginning to work on, you know, as our clients are beginning to reboot their business, we are putting together the resiliency plan that comes 3 or 4 months from now. It's like, okay, now you're back on your feet. We took a good square punch on the chin this time, but didn't knock us out, right?
Right.
So resiliency is how many times can you take that punch without getting knocked out? And we want to make that, you know, make sure they can take as many punches as possible.
Okay. So we are the curve is flattening a little bit. We are on
Mhm.
the other side. You think, um, what are you advising your clients to do? Okay, it may not happen in a month, it may not happen in 2 months, but what can small business people do starting today to be ready for that day when it comes? Because it will come. We will go back
Sure.
to the new normal. Again, I think the economy is just going to boom. We're going to be back where we were in I think short order. I know that I believe that firmly about the real estate business. So what are you telling your clients to do right now to be ready for this ramp up?
Yeah. So in terms of being ready for the ramp up, you first have to understand how you're going to get your team back. You have to maintain
If you can.
communication with them so you know how to get them back and can get them back quickly. You got to make sure your supply chain's in order. And you got to make sure your delivery mechanisms are in order. Now is also the time to ramp up sales hot and heavy. And if you're
Okay.
not selling right now, you're going to be without work when the doors open again. And that's going to be a real problem for a lot of businesses. And, you know, in terms of beyond this, how do we get ready for the next time? Because look, we live in the South. We saw it Sunday, right? I mean, I want to avoid people. I'm supposed to be avoiding people, but there's this tornado coming. How do I go to the shelter and avoid people at the same time, right? And so it could be tornadoes, ice storms, hurricanes, any manner of things that could happen. We have to learn how to tell the future, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're not always going to be perfect, but if you think about what could happen, you create some contingency plans for that, and you say, okay, if I see this beginning to happen, then I know that that's probably going to lead to the next step and the next step. So I need to have a plan in place. Know what those numbers and indicators are that you're paying attention to, so that you can measure them. Right? I mean, if China had 30,000 cases, is that bad? Well, I don't know. I mean, well, you know, if I haven't been paying attention to it, 30,000 of anything sounds terrible.
Yeah.
As a percentage of their population, it's less than 1%. So, you know, we have to, you got to do the work now so that you know what to pay attention to, you know what to respond to, and you have that plan. And by mentally going through that plan, you can develop some measure of confidence in it, so that it's not as frightening, and we can kind of courageously step into that plan and say, this is what we think is going to happen, and this is what we're going to do.
Yeah, you and I have been preaching planning for years and years, and this is an important time for them to do that. We've got a couple of minutes left. Your final thoughts on where we are today, how soon we can get things going back up, and just in general, what do you want to tell the folks?
Sure. I think things begin to open slowly, but that back pressure forces us into a position where we're going to see a very vibrant spending pattern emerge from this.
Mm-hmm.
The businesses that are structurally and procedurally sound enough to respond to that and not be inundated by that are going to do very well. There will be some businesses that fail, and in the retrospective analysis of this, you know, we'll have a much better picture of what this is. But by and large, I think business comes out of this much better if we start loosening these restrictions in the next 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
If we get into May, then we start running into some real problems.
Yeah.
And so we got to get people shopping and spending money again as quickly and as safely as possible. I'm not, in no way am I an advocate of, all right, let's go back to sneezing on each other again with all the pollen. We still have to do things smartly and intelligently, but we can do that. We're adults, we're smart people, and we can do that.
Yeah. And if you are an entrepreneur, as you and I both are, and we talk about a lot, you know, even when things like this happen, you don't just shut down and go away. You learn, you shift, you know, the big word now is pivot, and you come out the other side. I mean, you and I both had, you know, big success and big failure in business. And I learned more from that one failure than I did from those 10 successes. And I think that's the key, is to remain positive, use all of the resources that you have, and really examine your business. And, you know, I used to call it, you know, you autopsy the body after the business dies. Well, if the business ain't dead, you still need to take a look at what the last couple of months have done to you, what you learned from it, and what you can do moving forward. So, Tom, if someone wants to get in touch with you, how do they do so?
Sure. I'm going to give you 2 web addresses. If you want to get to my website, find out about working with me, it's tomrigsby.com, THOM. I get grief about that all the time, but, you know, tomrigsby.com. And if you're interested in putting together that 90-day action plan that we talked about earlier, understanding what you need to do step by step, day by day, we've put together a website for that as well. It's Prism, Prism, prismbusinesspartners.com. You can find out more about that plan and apply for that program there.
So out of this, you have started a new business.
I have.
There you go. Live and learn. I want to get you back in next time and talk more about Prism and
Sure,
find out
we'll
what
do
you
that.
guys are doing, who's involved, and what you can do for small business folks. All right, Tom, I'll put the links below. As always, my friend, good to have you on, and I'll see you again.
My pleasure. Talk to you soon.